Um, what I want to focus on here, and I'm sorry I do not understand how I messed up the slides. Um, this is another recipe for making French bread. And when it's at the end, it says, when baked and cold, rasp or grate all the outside off. So that is a performance detail. It is tends not to be, it's not necessarily in the recipes, it's in most of the French bread recipes. But this is a bread that you baked and then you did grate or rasp the outside off. And the way you do that, the best instruction I found is in a 1924, note that 1924 American cookbook, a cookbook my mother used, the Boston Cooking School cookbook, the 1924 edition, and it's for French bread, for French rolls. And it says that you bake the crust to be very, very dark, then you rasp it off, and then they put it back in the oven for about 5 minutes to solve any problems where you rasped it too far and got into yuckiness.
A question for you on that, on the rasping. Could it be that, and this has been oftentimes my experience and my wife's experience with baking bread in a variety of antique type oven situations, um, it's often better to bake at an accidentally higher temperature than a lower temperature, and consequently, you tend to get a lot more burn on the crust or darkness on the crust, um, which would need then to be rasped off.
Well, James, you absolutely have hit the nail on the head. These were baked in retained heat ovens. So these are big ceramic ovens. You know, whether they're made of refractory ovens, I mean to say, whether they're made of brick or stone or clay. You got the oven super, super hot. You then, with a fire inside the oven, you then swept that all the embers out and mopped the oven floor when the oven was hot enough. And you're working on radiant heat. You know, I'm fond of saying that heat is heat is heat, and that a 450 degree or 250-degree Celsius oven is a 250-degree Celsius oven. But in fact, when heat is radiant heat, it does produce a very, very superior crust. It also is a very moist environment because the oven was sealed, hermetically sealed. So these breads were baking in an extremely humid environment. The modern steam induction commercial oven or putting steam in your home oven are all workarounds. So yes, this had an awful lot of had very, very thick crusts. But the reason that they scraped it off was actually not because they had thick crusts. But you want to bake these French breads dark. I think that's the point. And thank you, James, for bringing that up. You want to bake them super, super dark. But we're going to get into this from the Maison Rustique in 2 weeks. The crust was considered unhealthy for affluent people, people like us. The crusts were considered affluent, were considered unhealthy. Yeah, just to prove it, this is actually a recipe for rasped rolls in an American cookbook from 1924. So things die slowly. The ideas die slowly. I guess we can use this since it's a modern recipe. The current, a recent recipe format, we're going to see this developing in the talk if I can find my slides. We now tend to have the ingredients listed at the top and then have the descriptions. And then in a super modern cookbook, there'll be a story that the writer will write called the head note, where we romance the recipe coming in front. But do notice and keep in mind conceptually as we're thinking about recipe, this talk is about recipe, is that the specificity of a list that says 1.5 cups scalded milk, 2 tablespoons butter, half a tablespoon sugar, or this baker's math that I'm encouraging us all to use, doesn't have the softness and the improvisational aspect of bread baking that is inherent to bread baking. What makes a master baker, what makes someone like Carl, who is a baker at Paratos and the curator of the Paratos Sourdough Library. For those of you who don't know him, we'll have him back giving a talk later in the year, is this relationship between the baker and the dough. And I think something interesting about writing the recipes down is that we do tend to lose this sense of a relationship with what we're doing. I'm just going to share this. E. Smith emphasizing the rasping. She's saying when they have lain in a quick oven about a quarter of an hour, turn them on the other side and let them lie about a quarter longer, then take them out and chip all your French bread with a knife, which would be better than rasping it making it look spongy and of a fine yellow, whereas the rasping takes off that fine color. So, they are, you're seeing an aesthetic here, right? She's thinking about the color of the final roll, but not the way we do the color that comes out of the oven. She's not thinking of walking into a Parisian bakery and just being wowed by all those beautiful shades of brown. She's thinking of the color that you get artificially by manipulating that bread.
So am I correct that James here again? Am I correct that what she's then saying is that you have essentially a charred outer layer of that loaf, and when she's chipping away at it, she's arriving at the somewhat lighter inner coating of that char?
Yes, James, that's exactly what she's saying. And somewhere, I have a late 19th century American reference that says that you can use that char to make a fake coffee, to extend your coffee. So if you're in really a bad way and you can't even afford chicory, which makes the coffee very dark but very delicious in small quantities, then you can add that. So yes, it's very, very, very dark. It's very dark. It's very dark. So I just do want to emphasize this performance detail. At the end of her bread recipe, she says the bread must be rasped when baked. Okay. Now, there is a problem with this recipe. If you look at the sentence before, a quart of flour should weigh just 1 pound and a quarter. Now, that's interesting because we know that white flour weighs 1 pound. We know that whole meal flour does weigh 1 pound and a quarter per quart. But maybe their flour absorbs a lot of humidity. She's in Virginia. I don't know. Normally, I would say that is a hint to what the flour is being used in the recipe.